Joining me now to discuss this is civil rights attorney James Cook. Nice to have you back, James.
Hey, thank you for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Excellent.
So tell us, for people who don't know, can you explain what the expungement process looks like?
Yeah, so expungement is really about the process of either erasing your record or sealing it. And it really comes down to, you really want your record erased. You don't want it sealed, because if it's erased, then no one can see it. No agencies. But if it's sealed, then that means that some agencies can, like specific government agencies, when they do background checks. So really, what I would say, I always argue for, sort of a national policy, a national law on expungement. And again, you in the segment that you just played, we're talking about certain crimes, right? I mean, murder, sex crimes against children, rape, that type of thing. Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily you don't want to hide those crimes. Moral turpitude as well, because moral turpitude covers embezzlement and white collar crimes. So where people are stealing large amounts of money when they're in management positions. So I would argue for a national policy on expungement. It's really about getting it erased. If it's just sealed, you never know. You apply for a job that requires a state license or a federal license, or you apply for certain types of housing. Somebody might be able to see your criminal record. So I always argue for the national policy.
So
and then,
there's
I guess one of the other
federal expungement. No federal expungement statute, right?
There's no general right, exactly. But here's the thing is there is none yet, and I think that should be part of Biden's plan. I mean, they're talking a lot about reparations, criminal justice reform. Expungement should be at the forefront, because first of all, you can just take into account the constitutional considerations that if you have a minor felony or a misdemeanor that keeps you from getting certain jobs, that type of thing, you are, you're precluded from your rights under the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Can't own a gun. That's the Second Amendment, right? That's what the conservatives and the constitutionalists are always pointing at. Second Amendment, can't own a gun. Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment, right? Unreasonable searches and seizures, right to be free of self-incrimination, and right to counsel. In some cases, you might have a four-way search clause which prevents you from some of those protections. Eighth Amendment, when you have a criminal record, it's like double jeopardy under the Eighth Amendment. You're convicted twice. You can't get jobs. You can't get housing. And then beyond the Bill of Rights, the 13th Amendment, which was to abolish slavery and abolish the badges and incidences of slavery. The fact that you are black, a person of color, and even a poor white person, if you have one of these convictions, it's the same thing. It's almost like being an indentured servant. Having to go back to prison for certain things. And then again, the 14th Amendment always comes into play, and we're talking about the equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment, where you analyze, certain laws and the fact that there may not be an expungement clause based on race, or even, and that's the highest level of scrutiny under the equal protection clause, or you can analyze it based on the rational basement, where it's not rationally related to a legitimate government interest. That will affect you if you are, a low-income, middle-class white person watching this without the money to hire a very expensive attorney to get your record erased or sealed. So you're affected by the Constitution. And then, if you just allow me to make a point about Minnesota, we were just watching the people in George Floyd Square, and Minnesota has two statutes which address expungement, and specifically. You can get the records sealed. You can use one to get the records sealed when they're maintained by law enforcement agencies. But then there's another statute which applies to all criminal agencies. So there's a little bit of disconnect there. But the most important feature that I think are the juvenile laws that apply to expungement, and specifically because we're about kids. who do mischievous things and all of a sudden have a criminal record. And then when they're an adult, they're mature. All of a sudden, you can't get a job. And I'll say this: a friend of mine who I went to high school with, his name is John Geffen, took a case to the Supreme Court which changed this law and said that if there are records relating to delinquency arrests, you can't just expunge the record for the adjudication. You have to wipe out the complete record. All right, and again, I'm kind of giving a shout out to my friend John Geffen, but the point is that he changed the law. He took that to the Minnesota Supreme Court, concurring decision from Hall of Famer Alan Page, and that is a forward thinking, a forward thinking progress in the law, and most states should adopt that. And then I'll go on to say that California has some good expungement records with specifically laws which specifically target cannabis crimes. And Kamala Harris, despite all the things that the conservatives try to say about her, she actually thought about doing some expungement, but she couldn't really do it. So what she did is she said, you know what? I'm just not going to prosecute low-level cannabis crimes because, that's a large part of the things that, disproportionately affect Black and brown people, low-income white people. So I'm not going to prosecute them. And she was true to her word. And that's a workaround. But now in this administration, she went from senator to now vice president. Now we need a national, we need a national law, a federal law on expungement. Low-level crimes, hopefully cannabis, we need not just seal the records, we need to erase them.
Whew, James, wow. Thank you for enlightening us. You just went through a whole lot there. But we need to hear that. I appreciate that because this, like you said, can affect people for the rest of their lives. And I don't know if it's going to even get to that level where the vice president will be able to deal with that on top of everything else. I want to ask you specifically about Florida. You mentioned a couple of states. Now, in Florida, of course, that voters passed an amendment to the state's constitution that would restore voting rights to former felons. But then the governor, Ron DeSantis, signed a bill requiring the felons to pay all fees connected to their case before they could vote. So tell us, if someone gets their record expunged or set aside, do they still have to deal with those kind of roadblocks?
Of course. I mean, first of all, let's just talk about Florida in general. I mean, we know what's going on in Florida. I mean, you got Casey, you got DeSantis. I mean, it's to me, my personal opinion, a huge clown show. And specifically, these laws, are specifically targeted at, they're choosing their voters, right? And yeah, that's the point. Is that again? I always go back to the basics. It's erasure versus sealing. And we want erasure. And I'll also add this because Ron DeSantis is one of those guys.
Wait, does anywhere have erasure? I got to ask you real quick. Does anywhere have erasure?
No, that's the issue, and that's what we really need. Well, actually, California actually does. They will completely erase. They will erase a record if it's related to a cannabis crime. Because cannabis is now legal in California. So they will erase it in those circumstances. Right. But there's still circumstances where your juvenile record could come up and be used against you when you apply for a job in housing. And I am saying to everyone, I don't know about every state. Remember, I live in Minnesota and California, but Minnesota could take this up. Prime chance. My city council, they can defund the police. Well, if they can't get that done, this is a workaround. Right? We have all this talk. Take the money out of all this money that they put into bike lanes, $24 million, use a quarter of it to start an expungement commission and specifically focus on, erasing the record, not just sealing it. Okay. But yeah, the laws are complicated, state to state. But the point is let's get right on the right track and erase the records as opposed to sealing them. And by the way, just to comment on Florida.
To do this?
Well,
okay, comment on Florida, but then I want to do people just have to go to a lawyer and give them a bunch of money? to get this done? You can't do this on yourself. There's no
file a
form
petition
online
for
or
an
anything,
expungement.
right?
Right. Well, it depends again from state to state, because every state has their different expungement laws. But the basic process is you file a petition with the court in your state, and then there's a hearing, and then the judicial officer gets you're heard, and then they make a recommendation as to whether or not it can be expunged or sealed. But let's make it a federal process, and again, let's go for erasure. And I'm talking about certain types of crimes. Again, not sex crimes, not moral turpitude, not violent murders, that type of thing. But we're talking about kids like when I was 17 and a lot of mischief, trespassing. I remember train tracks. Now I became mature, turned things around. I'm talking to you, so you got to give people a second chance, and this is the way to do it. Like, make that process easy, and states can set aside a specific commission. And that's what I'm saying to my city council in Minneapolis. Do this, propose it to the state, or just make it happen in the municipality. And all of a sudden, now when you expunge people's records, you have a whole host of contributing citizens that can make money, that can house themselves, that can get better education, because they don't have to cite those things on their record. And all of a sudden, you just open up, the sky becomes the limit for a whole host of people. This should be part of the economic recovery plan, part of the infrastructure.
And James, you talked about Minneapolis. Of course, you were there. I'm just curious, have you been to George Floyd Square today or recently? We know we've been bringing our viewers live pictures. The city started removing the memorials in the square, and activists there are not happy about that.
Yeah, I was there. I haven't gone today. I did go on the on the anniversary, and this is what I'll say is that it's a double-edged sword, because you want that area to recover, right? You want the businesses, because that was in the 60s and the 70s, and even the 80s and early 90s, that area that you're showing right now was a largely black neighborhood, and close to there is Central High School, where Prince went to high school and played basketball and did his music. But that was a thriving economic area. And so in one sense, you want the barriers removed, and you don't want the protests there, because you want it to thrive again. But at the same time, we do need to remember this. And I think just by, you and I having these conversations, and Biden, Harris with the laws that they want to pass, the consciousness, all throughout the United States, I think that we will remember George Floyd. And I don't think that taking down the barriers and allowing the traffic to go through there, get commercial foot traffic, it doesn't harm anything. And plus, look, taking down the barriers is one thing, but I'd like to see the city council fix those areas in those neighborhoods that were destroyed by the riots. All right, it's one thing, the police station, but most of those businesses were owned by people of color and low-income white folks, and we need those businesses restored. So really, let's focus on giving money to those merchants to open those businesses back up. And this is, I'm sorry to keep saying, I think it's just sort of the incompetence in some ways of my city council, but I think they can turn things around. But they got to stop focusing on platitudes and bike lanes and low-hanging fruit. Let's actually make some policy decisions. If you can't get defund the police done, then let's fund the black and brown and low-income white merchants and Native Americans and so on. We have the ability to do that. So yes, it's a bittersweet moment that they took down the barriers, but let's get the commercial traffic back up and running, and let's also focus on the area over near Lake and Hiawatha. Let's get those businesses back up and running and catering to people.
Yeah, we know it's a tough time for you guys in Minneapolis. Our hearts, of course, go out to the community there for everything they've especially gone through. But we're out of time. James, you've been amazing today. We've learned so much. Thank you so much for being with us, and we hope to see you back again soon sometime.